Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, my fellow speaker, Charuta. I think my topic will be a bit in relation to what she presented. But anyway, so before beginning, I'm sorry, I won't be on video. I have some technical issues. I am not able to connect with my internet first. Yeah. So as philosophy students or practitioners, I think we all sometimes or the other must have been exposed to this statement. I mean, what is your philosophy? People generally ask each other, you are from philosophy field, you must have your philosophy. So we might have answered this question with academic eyesight by explaining what philosophy is, or we might have even pointed the fact that the statement is fallacious in itself. But most importantly, we forget that for layman, for any layman, philosophy is equal to beliefs. This points to the very important role of philosophy for people around. And with the help of an academic philosophy, we can actually um, implement and help in building the belief system of the counselee. Philosophy, which is a quintessential component. Hello? There's some disturbance.
No, continue, no problem.
Okay. Philosophy, which is the quintessential component of knowledge, which discusses the fundamental questions such as what is knowledge, how it is acquired, what is to be done with it, unfortunately misses from the public epistemology. With this presentation, I wish to elaborate about the role of philosophical position in philosophical counseling. I will begin by examining the role of philosophical counseling. Next, please. So the role of philosophical counseling, as we can see in this PPT, I have given very basic interpretation to this. Philosophical counseling is a contemporary counseling approach where the concerns of the counselee are resolved via different philosophical tools and methods, enabling the client to cultivate what may be described as their inner philosophy. The term inner philosophy plays a very significant role when it comes to philosophical counseling. This concept of personal philosophy is synonymous with a conscious articulation of one's all things considered personality and articulating it with the help of the counselee. And the counselee is eventually able to implement this theory in every aspect of their lives. This articulation is a very intrinsic process where the counselee might have some internal perception about what their personal philosophy is, but they do not feel connected with it. This connection could have been lost due to with time, or maybe the counselee is not yet aware of its existence. When we hear the ancient call to know thyself, we often dismiss it because we don't know what is worth knowing ourselves, nor do we know how to realize it. Another important role of philosophical counseling is to eventually help the counselee become self-reliant person than any dependent. The role of philosophical counselor, the primary role of philosophical counseling is to facilitate the importance of self-discovery, self-realization, and self-actualization process. With the help of philosophical tools and methods, the counselee can gradually interpret their lives from their own self-defined and self-understood philosophy. The inner philosophy can also be experienced. Sorry, is someone saying something? Okay. The inner philosophy can also be experientialized when we are in a very extreme crisis, when we think that this situation is very difficult to handle. And that can be a very important moment of creation of this self or this inner philosophy. Please, next. This process, there are many methods to philosophical counseling, but I have restricted myself to these two. This process works through an extensive exchange of dialogue. As you can see, the first stage, analysis and clarification. In this, there is an extensive exchange of dialogues and discussions about clients, beliefs, actions, values, purpose, commitments, not only what they presently are, but also whether and what and to what extent they may or can be altered. This can be identified with an insightful discussion about the issue, which eventually helps the counselee recognize incorrect, inaccurate, maladaptive, or impractical beliefs. With counter questioning and explanation, the counselee discovers, uncovers, and otherwise creates a self realizing solution which helps cultivate a personal philosophy. So, this stage helps in clearing the initial confusions and hindrances. This can also be practiced with the help of Socratic dialogue, which examines and clarifies the initial issues with the form of questions. The second stage, the stage of self transcendence. Um, this second stage is mostly concerned with the growth and development of the individual post after the clarification of their doubts. The word transcendence is not entirely used here in respect to spirituality, but it is a guided medium to help the counselee practice their personal philosophy so they can become a better evolved person. If the counselee does not have any strong belief for any fundamental philosophies, then the process of transcendence can also provide an alternative course of action, which may extend beyond the network of thoughts which the counselee is currently living in. So this stage actually helps in entangling the causes of distress, which might be arising out of various interwoven factors. Next, please. So in this presentation, I will try to present two case studies from my personal practice as a philosophical counselor. In both these cases, there were some conceptual and methodological issues in their personal philosophical positions, which prevented them from living a prolific and authentic life. So the first case is the case of S. Um, she is a woman in her mid 30s. She was married at a very young age. I'll just give a background about this person. Most importantly, she was a OCD patient. She was under psychological treatment, and her psychiatrist recommended her to visit a counselor, and she came to me with that issue. Her initial concern was to get over with OCD. But when I discussed further, the prominent issue or the characteristics of any OCD person is primarily a person who is fearful of many things. But most importantly, her fear was not only limited to household materials. She was very particular about the locks of her home. No, her fear were more beyond that. She was fearful about her own faith. She was fearful about being alone. She was fearful about her own health, her family. And yet again, she was highly anxious about everything in her life. This also pointed to the another characteristic of her was always to be perfect. She always believed that whatever I do in my life is good and is good for others, which also made her very much dependent on them. These two are very contrasting. A perfectionist should not be dependent on people rather than independent because they have their own way to go. But exactly this was the reason she was living in a very conflicting life, because she was perfect. She was a perfectionist in her work, but also dependent on them because of OCD. This dependency led her to a more anxious life, a more scared life, because even for washing her hands, you can understand someone had to stand next to her to close the tap off, because she couldn't do that by herself. And she would eventually go on for washing her hands, taking baths for very, very long hours. Her concepts about, next, please. Just click and all the animations can come together. Yeah, that's it. Her concepts about God, faith, personal well being, and religion were so deeply entangled with each other that she could not differentiate between any of them. Her initial dialogues were like, if I don't pray to God, my life will simply worsen. I'm being punished for my past sins. I eventually asked her, how do you feel after practicing these rituals, after reciting her mantras in the morning? And she simply said, I feel like I get up with an immediate headache. I feel puzzled throughout the day. Her repetitive statement, her prominent repetitive statement was that everything is the result of my past karma, my past sins. I must have done past karma. So we eventually discussed on those lines. Next, please. Her substantive philosophical position of her faith in God was on the conditionality of the theory of karma. Here, I shed the light on the intellectual role of karma through the famous words of Lord Krishna to Arjuna in the Bhagavad-Gita, that one should concentrate on the deed rather than the fruit. With the theory of karma, we could also shed, if we philosophically examine the role of karma, we can shed lens and to the other factors also, which I mentioned. First is living in the present. The theory of karma does not necessarily aims for living a life where you have to consider your past karma. It is important that you live an authentic life in the present moment. You are committed to what you value the most. Because practicing rituals out of fear, practicing customs out of fear or greed is obviously not a good karma, because as Krishna said, that you cannot concentrate on the fruit, you have to focus on the deed. Because if there is greed, in the Hindi we say lalach, then you're not actually practicing what you truly believe in. She rectified this thought initially. The second philosophical exposition of karma can also be on momentariness, that even if you see, if you we don't have the option to go back and see what we have done in the past, nor we have the option to look for the future. The only thing we have is the present, and everything is momentary to it. And how you live every moment, especially in this state, even while I'm talking, we are creating a moment, we are creating past every second. And how we are living right now is the only thing which we have under control, which also leads me to talk about control, the factor of control. Because every person now and then feels like they don't have the right control over their lives or some other person. But exactly what control is, control, if in English you say, can be a um, a very negative word. If it feels like you want to bound someone, but control is nothing but, right now when you relate with theory of karma, it is just how conscious you are about your actions, and that leads to an authentic life, that leads to living an authentic life. I also want to mention that even being a psychological patient and psychiatrist patient, I can say that it takes time when you are under a medical condition, but you would be surprised to know that uh, these basic things were not corrected in her. She was always fed like that. She was always believed like that because she has seen in her family, and that is how she grew up. She was so troubled by her family issues that she forgot who she was, and that led to her even living a delusional life. So most importantly, even patients suffering from OCD for past 15 years could live a better life in few months after our sessions. We still continue, we still talk, we still discuss, but even I was amazed that how philosophy can play a role in with psychological patients also. Next, please. I'll just briefly discuss about this case. So this case is of D. Dhruv, not his real name. I will just brief about his nature. He was also suffering from a psychological and psychiatric issue. He was a patient who was diagnosed with depression almost 27 years ago. He was married late. He has a family. His children are young, and he was highly dependent on money. That if I don't have enough money for my kids, I am not a good father. This life is not worth living. This constant fear for his kids was always in his back of his mind. The fear sprouted out of the fact that, especially when as young, men are especially, boys are especially fed that they have to take care of their family. But in this case, Dhruv was earning very well. He was almost above many middle class salary. His wife was earning pretty well. They are well-to-do family. Even after that, there was a constant greed for money, that this amount is necessary for my well-being. But there was no definition to the money. There was no exact amount that this type or this much money will make me happy. Then since last 2 years, he was undergoing a very spiritual journey. He said to me that I've been reading a lot of spiritual books and I connect with the theory of Atman and Brahman, that both God and soul, the Atma within me is no less than God. I feel I have that power, I have that embodiment, but I don't know how to practice it because I go back to money all the time. So in um, this case addresses the methodological application of spirituality in his life by exhibiting a prior belief in the non-dual position of Atman and Brahman, while also showing that he was dependent on money as the only source of happiness. But often in this past, this dependency of money, I have left him highly anxious and worried, so much so that he started questioning his identity. He was so fearful about himself, he had no idea about what he was doing. And maybe that also led to serious growth in depression. But I didn't touch that line because I'm not from that background. The latest stance, the stance of money, to have money to experience joy in life, contradicted his former belief in the non-duality of soul and God. But with his experience in spirituality, he informed about an experience in his life that when he was highly peaceful and well connected with what he truly believed, he was able to achieve a financial goal as well, what he had planned for himself. His family was doing well emotionally. So he has experienced the good side of spirituality and he wants to practice it because of that reason. To enable the counselor to put his spirituality in practice, I expounded on the theory of Maya by none other than Advaita Vedanta by sharing that the world desires called Maya, please next, led to the apparent separation of the individual self, which is Jivatma, from the supreme self, which is Paramatma. When he worked on the theory of Maya, Dhruv was quite intrigued yet confused that does this mean that I have to completely devout out of money? Because for him, money was a very integral part. But our entire investigation and interrogation around the theory of Maya then gradually shifted from the need of Maya and to the desire of Maya. Because when you need something, when you need a life essential source, and when you desire something out of want or greed, there is a very intrinsic difference. You feel that you have lost that power and given it to something else. So he eventually agreed to the fact that the separation which he has internally created between what he desires and what he needs is simply out of feeling comfortable that this much money would make me happy. But when there is no line to money, the greed just grows. So, with the knowledge of Brahman, he could break the delusion of worldly desires and attachment, and he started building an independent self. He could realize how powerful he is when he feels that I am no less, that my Atma, the Jivatma, and the Paramatma are no different. They're interconnected. He could realize he could eventually move forward to that theory. So we discussed more articles about Advaita Vedanta, and eventually he could move forward from this materialistic source of joy. Though he still falls back, we are still in the process, but it is very important to understand how philosophy can navigate the experience, how it can work through. When you start talking to laymen about such theories, It is no more about academic qualification. It is no more about how much paper or how much material you have. If we cannot communicate it to the people who don't understand it academically, because not everyone is accustomed to practice. They want to understand. So it's like teaching a young child what philosophy is, but while also understanding if they truly believe in it or not. Like in second case, this person experienced it first, and that is how he wanted to pursue that faith. Not everyone can everyone understand what they truly believe in. Maybe they need help with it, but that's a separate topic. But in this presentation, this is how I wanted to present that how the position of a counselor's philosophical thought can navigate an very authentic counseling process. So it helps both as a counselor and the counselee to practice an authentic conversation. Thank you so much.